Well, I think attracting somebody's attention who might not otherwise care about an issue is essential, because it's one thing to preach to the converted, it's quite another to reach the broader section of people who haven't really thought about that issue, but they notice it when they are lured in by a celebrity they might admire or by some sexy ad. We are no different than a Madison Avenue ad agency who is trying to lure people into our issues in as glitzy a way as possible. Then once we have their attention, we give them the not so pleasant information about what happens to animals in the fur trade or in circuses or the meat trade. I wouldn't say that all press is good press, but if you are a pressure group and you're out for social change, the biggest fear is being invisible. We have to be on people's minds all the time for them to even consider these issues. And so, sometimes we take some bad press hits, and that's just, I think that's just the way things are with any issue, with any movement. There's going to be some great moments, there's going to be some iffy moments, but I think as long as you are really pushing forward and grabbing people's attention, making them consider these issues, then you've done something. Well, I became involved with animals when I was a kid, even before PETA was founded. We used to take in all the cats from the street that were abused. Kids would be so horrible to cats that were strays. Life isn't like Disney's The Aristocrats for cats on the street. There were neighbors that were crushing cat skulls in dumpster lids, throwing newborn kittens against a stucco wall. So our apartment became a kind of indoor sanctuary. I wouldn't say that we were hoarders or animal collectors, but we didn't even know there was such a thing as an animal shelter. We just thought, you see some abused creature on the street, you look after them. It's the way my brothers and I grew up. And then I realized that other animals had it pretty rough too. As I grew up, I realized that what was happening in slaughterhouses and in laboratories so far away from public view was horrific. So it became a very early goal of mine to educate people about that. And I think I was probably quite strident when I was a high schooler, and my punk rock friends and I were really desperate to get people to think about these things, no matter the antisocial way we'd go about it. And then luckily, when I was in college, PETA came around, and I got to know them. They were very close to the university where I graduated. And so I became involved and realized that there was another group that felt just the way I was. And we joined forces. I got together with PETA in 1985 when they had already done some incredible undercover investigations and had just burst on the scene. And so I was lucky to start with them shortly after they came around, and I've been with them ever since. That was 30 years ago. To tell you the truth, I'm not that bothered by people who act differently than I do. I just think that everyone has been exposed to these issues to a different extent. And I don't really get too frustrated at people who don't see eye to eye with me. I know that I'm not as evolved on some issues as I should be. So I think it's just a matter of talking about these issues, and over time, people start to learn things. And now that I have the luxury of having been involved for 3 decades, I can tell you countless people who were very, very nasty when these issues first came around, and now over time they've mellowed and realized that for a variety of reasons, animals are best left outside of our stomachs and off of our backs, and so I try to have patience, and I think that's why I've probably lasted as long as I have, is because I don't get too hostile to people who have differences of opinion. Our near-term goals are to get people to really have a good think and reevaluate our relationship with animals. Do we really need to eat them? Do we really need to wear them? What is it doing to our environment? What is it doing to our health? And we really want people to, at the first step, just digest this and learn, inform yourself. There's lots of great information out there. And then ultimately we think that people will listen to their sensible side and leave animals be. And I think we would love to have a world where there was no drought because the animal agriculture industries weren't draining all the rivers. We'd have wonderful bays and oceans because we wouldn't have killed off all the coastal sea life with the runoff from factory farms. We won't have a society that's so obese and dying of cancer and heart disease because we'll have eliminated most of those ailments because of changing our diet. So we can see a future that is quite bright. We've got a lot of work to do to get there, and we have a lot of adversaries in the agribusiness world. But my degree's in history, and I have every faith that if you keep fighting and you keep trying to educate people, generation by generation, things change. Yes, for me this is a lifelong commitment. I just turned 50 this year. It's my 30th anniversary with PETA, and every year gets a little easier for me because I've made so many mistakes in the past that I've learned from. I think in the nonprofit world, a lot of people kind of do it for a few years to be a decent citizen, and then maybe they'll move on into the corporate world. That's not me, and that's not really what you'll find at PETA. We are very dedicated, and we figure things out, and if ever we have something that doesn't go our way, we learn from the experience, and that's why we now have over 2 million members around the world, and PETA affiliates in China, India, Australia, all across Europe. We are an umbrella organization for all animal issues. We always take the animal side, even when it's uncomfortable, and I think that has really drawn a lot of support, even from people who may not agree with everything we do. They know what to expect when it comes to PETA. Well, it is difficult to look at a lot of the pictures, and I've been so upset by so many different cases we've had, but I find that it's almost like gasoline. It fuels my drive to stop the cruelties and to really use everything I've got to expose them and to stop them. So I don't torment myself by watching horrific films over and over again, although I do see all of our new case videos, which are heartbreaking. But to me, it is a big motivation. Just like when you might see a movie like Selma, and you see some of the racial violence that happened in Alabama in the 60s, everybody looks away or they get upset. And I think that's what really helps people evolve. When everybody saw that on the news in the 60s, they started to support civil rights. So even though it's uncomfortable, I think it's an important pill to swallow in order to realize what is really at stake here. Well, we actually have a lot of people who have had a change of heart about wearing fur or leather. They actually donate their coats to us, and we do things like give them to the homeless, the only people who really have a great excuse for wearing it. They have nothing else to wear and they're cold. So we give out fur coats to the homeless and leather coats, things like that. We also use them in library displays where you can see a beaver coat, and then you can see how beavers live in the wild. And so who wore it best? The fur wearer or the original beaver? You can make your own decision. So I think educational displays like that are very useful. Every time we get into a slaughterhouse, wherever it is, there is unsettling footage. I mean, animals don't walk willingly up to the blade. They don't want to have a captive bolt put inside their head. There are now factory farms all across the country. Small family farms are a rarity. Even 20 years ago, you wouldn't recognize animal agriculture for what it's become today. And they cut corners along the way to increase profits, and animals suffer as a result. So I think anybody with any business sense just knows that these animals are ground up and spit out in as cheap a way as possible for the industry, and there's a lot of suffering as a result. That's why they're trying to criminalize our undercover investigations, because we so routinely find unlawful cruelty to animals in factory farms and in the slaughterhouse. Well, I think if you take a look at what they're saying about animal experimentation, they said the same things before about slavery. There is no way the United States is going to succeed as an economic powerhouse unless we have slave labor to churn out the products. But guess what? We found another way. The Industrial Revolution came along and slave labor seemed antiquated. The same similar arguments were brought up when women dared to demand the right to vote. Who's going to look after the children? What's going to happen to the American family? Well, we found a way, and now society flourishes. The same things were said about interracial marriage or about gay marriage. Anytime you take a look at a social change, there's always going to be somebody who comes up with a really sensible, logical reason why it shouldn't happen, and those people are always washed out as history progresses. And there's no question that the animal experimentation issue is already underway to becoming very antiquated. They have done a lot of assessments of the war on cancer, only to find out that in the past 40 years, the biggest strides in cancer have come through early detection and through prevention, and medical intervention and animal experiments have played a tiny, tiny role in cancer advances. So I think we're putting so much money into it, we're expecting so many results. With all the money we've spent, we should have eternal life by now, but we're realizing that we have a greater control over our own health through prevention and taking better care of ourselves rather than pouring it into animal experiments.